Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for being here and for supporting the work of the Southern Center for Human Rights. I want to start by saying that it's a great privilege to get to work at the Southern Center. It's also a privilege to introduce you to my client, Christopher Williams. I met Mr. Williams last summer. At the time, he was incarcerated at Hancock State Prison near Sparta. He had been in prison in Georgia for 19 years for his involvement in a robbery that occurred in 1999 when he was 25. His friend decided to hold up a store clerk. Mr. Williams didn't have a weapon, but he went into the store while the robbery was in progress, and he took $26 off the floor. Fortunately, no shots were fired and no one was injured. For that crime, for being the unarmed accomplice in the robbery and taking $26, Mr. Williams was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At age 25, he was sent to prison to die there for this crime. When we met him after 19 years in prison, Mr. Williams had served more than enough time. He had an excellent disciplinary record, and he was employed as a librarian in the prison. As we got to know Mr. Williams, we learned a lot more about his story. We learned that he'd moved from Louisiana to Georgia as a teenager, and he had a hard time finding his place. We learned that over the time he spent in prison, he'd matured. We learned that he would write to his nieces and nephews from prison, pleading with them to live their lives differently than he had lived his. And we learned that despite his sentence of life without parole, he'd remained hopeful that he might one day be released so that he could work to support his family. The more we learned, the more absurd and cruel it seemed that Mr. Williams was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So SCHR Managing Attorney Patrick Mulvaney and I presented Mr. Williams' case to DA Boston and Judge Jackson in the form of an extraordinary motion for a new trial. We reached agreement that Mr. Williams' sentence was excessive and should be reduced. And we are happy to report that in December, Mr. Williams was resentenced. His life without parole sentence was changed to time served. He walked out of prison. He walked out of prison after 19 years, just in time to spend Christmas in Decatur with his mother, his brother, and his sister. Over the past few years, through a project spearheaded by SCHR Senior Attorney Atia Hawley and SCHR Managing Attorney Patrick Mulvaney, we've won the release of 20 people with extreme sentences for drug crimes. Mr. Williams' case was the first non-drug resentencing case we took, but we have already begun to represent other people like him. Mr. Williams' optimism inspires me, and his dogged commitment to supporting his loved ones also inspires me. I am so glad he is back home, and I am so glad that he is here tonight, accompanied by his mother, to speak to you.